In this video, we're going to use your Chapter 11 homework, problem number 1, to explain the concept of relevant costs, specifically opportunity and sunk costs, and how they relate to calculating the initial investment. So in this problem, we're trying to decide which cost to include in our initial investment. The cost to include are those costs that are relevant costs. Relevant costs are those that are capable of changing a decision. We're going to look specifically in this problem at two types of costs. The first cost we're going to look at is a sunk cost. Sunk costs are never relevant and can be ignored in making a decision. The reason for that is that the definition of a sunk cost, money spent in the past, that you have no future control over. Now, the thing about a sunk cost is that it is the same for all of your decisions. So if it's the same for all of your decisions, it can't help you make a decision. So, for example, the cost of your old car in trying to decide whether to sell your old car or to continue driving it. If you sell your old car, you spent $10,000 for it 5 years ago. If you continue to drive it, you spent $10,000 for it 5 years ago. It's the same for all options. You can't change what you did 5 years ago, so that would be a sunk cost. Now, the second cost that we're going to look at is an opportunity cost. An opportunity cost is a cost or benefit that arises from making a particular decision, so an opportunity cost is always relevant. So because an opportunity cost is always relevant, we will use it for decision making. So the definition of an opportunity cost or benefit arising from making a particular decision. Now, an example would be the trade-in value of the cost of the car, not of the cost, but the trade-in value of the car that you want to trade in. Now, no matter what you do, you bought the car 5 years ago, but if you trade the car in, you get the trade-in value. But if you decide to continue driving it, you don't get the trade-in value. So the difference is the original cost of the car would be a sunk cost because no matter what we do, we bought the car 5 years ago. From this point forward, any decision we make will not change that fact. But with an opportunity cost, we only get that trade-in value if we make the decision to trade it in. If we continue driving, we will not get that money. So let's look at this first problem, and let's decide which one is a sunk cost and which one is an opportunity cost. So let me go to the next page. So I have a nice little canvas to work with, and let's get going. So in this one, we have Gen X Industries is developing the incremental cash flows associated with the proposed replacement of an existing machine tool with a new, technologically advanced one. Given the following costs related to the proposed project, explain whether each would be treated as a sunk cost or an opportunity cost in developing the relevant cash flows associated with the proposed replacement decision. So basically what we're going to look at here is our decision. Whether to keep the old one or replace. So remember, any cost or benefit that is in just one of those columns is relevant. Any cost or benefit that is in both of those columns will not help in making the decision. So that would be considered a sunk cost. So I wanted to keep a little room there. Let's take a look. So in A, we have Gen X would be able to use the same tooling, which had a book value of $31,000 on the new machine tool as it had used in the old one. So basically tooling, if we keep it, we spent the $31,000 in the past. If we replace it, we still spent the $31,000 in the past. Notice it said which had a book value of $31,000. So had would pretty much tell you that that is a fact that happened in the past, and it's not telling us that we would sell it, which in one case would be a difference. So in this case, this is going to be considered a sunk cost. So A would be considered a sunk cost. And now let's move on to B. So for B, let's get that, and let's make sure that we have the proper columns here. So for B, Gen X would be able to use its existing computer system to develop programs for operating the new machine tool. The old machine tool did not require these programs. Although the firm's computer has excess capacity available, the capacity could be leased to another firm for an annual fee of $13,000. So we have our computer system lease. If we keep the old machine, we would get the $13,000 because we would not need the extra capacity, so we would lease that and get $13,000. If we decide to replace the machine, we're going to need that extra capacity and we won't get the $13,000. So notice now we have two different numbers here, and in B, they're not talking about in the past, they say could be. So could be would be the future, right? Had is the past, could be is the future. So in this case, this is going to be considered an opportunity cost. Let's now move on to C, and then we'll move on to D, and then we'll move on in the next video to a little bit more complicated problem. So we have our Part C. In Part C, Gen X would have to obtain additional floor space to accommodate the larger new machine tool. The space that would be used is currently being leased to another company for $8,000 per year. So we have that floor space. and the lease proceeds. So if we keep the old machine, we'll be able to lease the space to $8,000 per year. If we replace the machine, we're going to need that space and we'll have to give up the lease. So we can see here different numbers in both columns. Because it's different numbers in both columns, it is relevant. And the only relevant one of opportunity or sunk is opportunity. So in this case, this would be considered an opportunity cost. And let's move on to our final one. And hopefully you get the concept of opportunity cost versus sunk cost. So the last one we have here is D. D, Gen X would use a small storage facility to store the increased output of the new machine tool. Oh, actually, there are two more. Excuse me. The storage facility was built by Gen X 3 years earlier at a cost of $103,000. Because of its unique configuration and location, it is currently of no use to either Gen X or any other firm. So notice the storage facility is already built. It was built 3 years earlier at a cost of $103,000. There's no alternative use. So if we keep it, we spent $103,000 a few years ago, but we have no alternative use for it. If we replace it, we also spent $103,000 several years ago, but we're actually going to use it. So in this case, this is not relevant because it's in the same column. And the only one of those that is not relevant is a sunk cost. So the cost that we spent several years ago to build that storage facility would be considered a sunk cost. And now let's move on to the real final one. So in E, Gen X would retain an existing overhead crane, which it had planned to sell for its $181,000 market value. Although the crane was not needed with the old machine tool, it would be used to position raw materials on the new machine tool. This is actually going to be an opportunity cost, and I'll explain why in a moment as soon as I erase Part D. So in this case, if we decide to keep the old machine, we would sell the crane and we would get $181,000 sale price. If we decide to replace the machine, we will not sell the crane, we'll continue to use it, so we won't get the $181,000. So again, because there's two different numbers in the column, it's relevant. The only one that's relevant of those two is the opportunity cost. So the cost of the crane would be a sunk cost, but the $181,000 sale price would be considered an opportunity cost because we only get it if we decide to keep the old equipment. And there we go. Hopefully you understand the difference between sunk and opportunity costs, and we'll go on to the next homework problems in a future video.